Hello, and welcome to The Real Deal, where we have real conversations with real people, entrepreneurs, and business owners alike. Today, I have a beautiful lady that I met over Facebook page, and we connected in an interesting way. You know, she's overseas, which is so fantastic. And her name is Tiffany Turner. And this is such an amazing podcast that it's going to be because it's all about my favorite, which is mental health. She is a licensed clinical social worker with more than 20 years of experience in mental health field. She is the owner of the Affinity Consulting and co-owner of Infinity Wellness Center and Consulting. She is also certified clinical coach and owner of Turner Coaching and Consulting. Tiffany is an expert in the field of mental health and specializes in working with business owners, medical providers, and athletes. Tiffany is very passionate about opening the conversations around mental health and destigmatizing mental health and helping people step out of the toxic comparison mindset. Welcome, Tiffany. So good to have you on today.
It's so great to be on. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's just amazing, and it's so good that we connected over Facebook, which is I guess sometimes the way of the world now.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether the good and the bad, both, right?
Yes, exactly. The good and the bad. That's right. But it's been great. So can you tell us where are you based right now? Because we're
So I'm in Michigan, which and just north of Ann Arbor, where University of Michigan is at. So it is warm here right now, but we're very happy about that because we've been freezing for many months.
Yes. Yes, that's amazing because it's opposite here. I mean, it's 11 o'clock in the morning here, and you just said it was before we chatted, before we came on, it was about 9 o'clock at night and a bit cold here. I mean, cold for the Gold Coast, I'd say.
Right?
Oh, so it's fantastic to have you on, and I can't wait to get into this toxic comparison mindset that you really are passionate about. But first, can you tell the listeners and viewers how you got started in mental health and why you got started?
Yeah. So but the funny story is that there isn't a story. I went to an all-girls high school, and we had to test into certain classes because they were at the all-boys high school. And I wanted to take psychology because that was something that I was really interested in. And basically, I was told I wasn't smart enough to do it. And so that kind of set this driven path for me to say, like, but this is what I want to do, and you don't get to tell me no. So then I was very lucky to have parents who were very adamant about working during the summers in high school and college. And so I was able to get an internship far before they were the popular or thing to do. And so I went and worked on a psychiatric unit at a local hospital. And then I went to a kids camp and worked there and just kind of started feeling my way around. Social work is such a huge field. And I had some amazing teachers that I did abnormal psych with and some other things. And I just slowly saw my path kind of narrowing in this direction of seeing people for more than just the one characteristic that showed up, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways. I was fortunate I didn't have a family member who had severe mental illness or anything like that. Other than sports, I really hadn't experienced a lot of anxiety until I became a mom. Now I've got all kinds of it.
Yeah,
and a business owner and, a boss and all the things. Like being responsible for other people seems to be a big trigger. But yeah, like I worked in wilderness therapy. I traveled abroad and worked with the Aboriginal Police Force in Perth, Australia, which
amazing.
developed my love for Australia, which is funny now that I'm connecting with more people from Australia through Facebook.
Yes.
So, and then I worked in hospitals. I did all different kinds. Kids detention centers, pediatric primary care. So I've kind of done it a lot. I can't say all because I've never done community mental health. I've never done adoption. Like there's so many facets to social work, but really honing in on the mental health and reaching out and helping people see that it happens to almost everybody. Especially in the last 3 years, I feel like people have really gotten a dose for like, you saw people who had never really experienced anxiety.
Yeah.
Really come unraveled and just not know what to do with it. And so I think that's where being able to see that bigger picture has been one of my strengths as I've navigated this career path.
Yeah, amazing. And I love that you don't actually have that story, because not everyone seems to start a business of some sort because they have this story behind them that made them want to start the business. But you were just so interested in psychology, and you were told you weren't smart enough, and then you just said, no, I'm going to do this because I want to do it. And a lot of people don't do that, and that's just so resilient and strength based straight away to have that a lot of people don't. What would you say to people that are even starting a business in that sense?
Yeah. So, my parents owned their own business, and I watched the hard work that it took. And so I think that's really the key. Like you hear more and more stories about people just going off on their own in the entrepreneur path and other things. And I think you hear a lot of the ends, right? They're really successful and they're really unsuccessful or unfortunate. But you don't hear all the people in the middle, right? Which is a huge range of people. And I got to see it firsthand. And then my brother is also a business owner. And so we were just taught what I didn't know at the time was called grit of you put your head down and you could work and you do things. But what I feel like is so unique was it wasn't just about the work ethic. It was about creating this environment where you were doing what was right and what was in the best interest of the people you were working with and for and on behalf of. And that has really guided me in this later part of my life is seeing people as people, and sometimes those people have different struggles than us and sometimes they don't, but they're all just people and we're all going through life, in general on the same path. We might have little diversions and changes and switches that happen, bumps, detours, but we're all headed from one end to the other. And so the more people you can connect with, the more honest, sincere, and genuine or authentic you can be, that comes through in a lot of different ways. And so if you are thinking of starting a business, I think those would be the things that I would say you can't go wrong with. You can't go wrong being yourself and working hard and showing up. But you got to remember why you started in the first place, because there's definitely going to be some days where you're going to wake up and say like, oh, I would just really like to not do this today.
Yes, I totally agree with you there, Tiffany. I've had those moments, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners and the viewers have had those moments too.
Yeah, and it's one of the things like people just don't talk about. Like there are days where it's just like, I could go back to just like clocking in and out and it would be okay. Like
yeah. But then you want to keep going because it's the passion, doesn't it? That passion of whatever you're doing in your business. That really gets you going. And talking about passion, you're very passionate about toxic comparison mindset. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So it's just this idea that I've had for so long. And then I grew up before social media, so I
Yeah, me
didn't,
too. It's okay.
it was just that like show up in sports, right? Like I remember always thinking like this person's in the lane next to me as a swimmer and played soccer, and the person's in the lane next to me, and like I just have to work harder than them, right? And so we grow up in this comparison world, right? Where we're compared to other kids in the classroom, why can't you sit still like Joey? Joey's sitting still. And so we have all these comparisons, and whether it's up or down comparisons, people who we compare ourselves to, people who we perceive as being better off than us or more fortunate, or people below. But at the end of the day, it's kind of how our perception and what that does to us, and that toxic comparison is actually, so I've been calling it this for a while, but it's in the dictionary, it's called comparisonitis, which I did not know until, I started doing all this research, and I was like, that's actually a word. That sounds like a word that I would make up and people wouldn't believe me, but
it's actually a word.
It is actually a word.
Well, I didn't know that either. Isn't that you learn something new every day? There you go.
I know. And so it's become this thing for me where it is working in the mental health field. It's become more and more apparent with social media and the accessibility. It's not just social media, because like we met through social media. It's not all bad, right?
Yeah.
But it's the accessibility and filters, and instead of looking at the person next to you, now you can look at the person across the world through a filtered version. It's this distorted version. And whether it's starting a business and somebody getting online, which I see these every day, entrepreneur, I don't know why this is so hard. I just applied for a EIN number and I opened my business and I was full. And you're like, what is happening right now? Like, what am I doing wrong? Because I'm working really hard and lots of hours. And I think it causes people to have anxiety and depression about that process. Because what am I doing wrong? They just opened their business and they're full and they're happy and they're going on vacations around the world. And here I am working 10-hour days and like not remembering if I replied to somebody's email or not. Like, what's wrong with me, right? And so it becomes this like really hard place of not knowing what's reality, not knowing what you're comparing yourself to, and how to move through that and shift that out. And I think that really has added to a lot of anxiety and depression, because especially in teens and kids, we as adults know that it's not real. No matter how many times we as adults tell them it's filtered and not real, no matter how many pictures they take with the filter on it, they still don't process that picture that they're looking at might not be real, right? And it also doesn't take into account all the other factors, right? So like for me, when I started my outpatient practice, I had 15 plus years of building relationships and work in the mental health field. So when I say my outpatient was full in 2 months, I had done 15 years of work before to fill it in 2 months, right? But it's those socioeconomic status supports, right? Like I couldn't do all that I do without my family support, without advice from my parents, and they have run their own business, and my brother and my husband who helps with the kids so that I can do things like this. Like and not everybody has that luxury. So I think understanding toxic comparison is not just apple for apple. It's understanding that there's this whole big picture and dynamic that happens. And before you compare yourself to somebody else and try and do the apple for apple, you have to really dive in and understand what's their background, what's their support system like, who are they connected to, and understand that all of us are headed in a path in the same direction. Career, we all want to get there. But instead of being discouraged by that, really turning around and saying, okay, they opened a business and they're full. I have other factors. It might take me a year to get full or 2 years to leave my job and go here, but I can get there. and look at it in an encouraging way and be happy for that person that they're there, because now you know it's possible. And so being able to transition from, I want that, and it's unfair that I don't have that, I'm not full in 2 months, to over here where it is, that's amazing. They got full in 2 months. I might not be full in 2 months, but I'm so happy they are, and I know it's possible. And let me seek out the positive parts of what they're doing so that I can latch onto those and figure out how that's going to work in my life.
And that's so fantastic. But what I'm curious about those, Tiffany, is the people that maybe you work with. Can you give us a case study? You don't have to name any names of a person that you might have worked with that have had that anxiety or that depression because of these scenarios, and what did it do for them?
Yeah. So, I mean, gosh, my head's like exploding with examples. This, like, I have this amazing, a lot of what I hear is it was during the pandemic and working with these really high functioning people who, they've always known how to study their way out or work their way out or work hard enough or use their resources. And all of a sudden they were faced with this situation where they couldn't do that. And so there are people who I've worked with who looked at that and said, but everybody else is doing fine. I'm a mess. Why am I the one who's a mess? Like, I look around, people are going to work, their kids are going to school, and I'm the one who's stressed out and a mess. And so deconstructing that feeling or perception or picture that they were the only ones, and reshifting and focusing that anxiety about how they aren't the only ones. Other people just had a better mask.
Yes.
Other people are better liars.
Yes. Oh, yes. Okay, let's be frank here, Tiffany. And people are liars, and that's what the mask is, isn't it? Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. That comes to the back of my mind a lot.
Yeah. And so, it's about deconstructing. Okay, what do you like? It looks like they have it all together. What does that actually look like, though? What do you actually know about their life? What support systems do they have? I had friends who had no support systems. They worked in the hospitals. They didn't get to stay home, and, they had kids to take care of too. And then I had other people who were at home, and other people who went to work and had tons of support, grandparents who lived by or whatever, and had community around them. And so walking them through, okay, but what does that actually look like? How do you know that do you talk to them about are they on medication? Like, are they seeing a therapist? Are they working with a coach? Like, what do you actually know about the facts of what's happening right now? And then it starts to click of like, well, I don't, but I see them show up every day at work, smiling, happy, doing their job. And I'm not. I'm stressed and overwhelmed and feel really out of place and out of line with what's going on. And so I think that is really where helping people see that it is more than just what it looks like when you show up.
Yeah, definitely. And it is mostly social media, and people put videos out there and say that they've done this and done that, which it can be hard to not compare yourself to others. Really, it can be quite challenging. So what would be the tip for the listeners or the viewers on how you manage that?
So I came up with, because this has been so prevalent lately, I came up with an acronym RISE. So as a quick way to just kind of put yourself in perspective and gain that back. So R is for reality checking. Is this really the presentation? Is that really where things are at? And why am I comparing myself to this person? Why is it important to me? Is this up or down comparison from that social comparison theory of, is this somebody who I'm comparing myself that I feel like or perceive is above me, or that I perceive as below me? And why is that important to me? Because knowing and understanding, if you walk around in most of the comparisons are upward comparisons, there's going to be a lot of negative talk and negative self-talk kind of pushing you down, which is going to increase depression and anxiety and all of those feelings. So asking yourself, am I comparing upward or downward? Set some realistic expectations. So what I mean by that is, like I was talking about earlier, if it's not about making $50,000 in 5 months, it is about saying, this person's path looks different than mine. What are the factors in theirs and what are the factors in mine? And I know I have 15 things on my plate. So getting this done by next week is unrealistic. And that's going to lead to comparison of me feeling not good enough. And then the last one is the E, employ an abundance mindset. So what this means is kind of what I was talking about earlier, like being able to be at a place when you've gotten through those other steps of like, wow, I'm so grateful I have somebody else modeling that this is possible. And I know it's out there. I just have to figure out my path and what that looks like, and being really clear that it's not going to be the same as theirs because they have different factors and they started out with different factors. And by doing kind of that quick 4 steps, which is not quick when you start, but
but it's great analogy and it's great acronym. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. By doing that, like it takes away the filter or layer of this image that it is life's a walk in the park and you're always going to be successful, and if you're working hard you're doing it wrong, and that what everybody puts out there is 100% accurate, because it's not the case.
No, it's not. And I think what we connected a couple weeks ago, and we're speaking about mums and how mums start running their business, and then they have all these kids to we have other responsibilities, and then we put this pressure on ourselves with people without kids.
Yep. And comparing what that looks like, right? And it's not that one's better than the other, but for me, that was a huge realization to understand that I was choosing to not do things. Like I was at that retreat in Asheville, and that was a huge thing for me, but it's a very conscious choice to take 4 days away from my kids to improve my career and improve myself. It's important self-care. It's important for me to always feel like I'm challenging myself, but it's a hard decision. And so I'm not going to ever be the one, as much as I love and miss traveling, just to up and leave on the weekend because I have an opportunity for something. It's always a choice, and that's okay. Like my progress might be slower because I choose to take a week off to go with them somewhere instead of going on a retreat or instead of working that week. So, but this process, going through that RISE acronym for me, really keeps me grounded and grateful, and choosing intentionally where I compare myself to and how to stay out of it being something negative or a place that creates a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, interesting. So it's fascinating. So who do you work with now? You're working with men, women? Who are you working with?
So in my therapy practice, I work with everybody. I get a lot of referrals for anxiety and pediatrics. I work with kids with selective mutism, and I work with a lot of college students on transitions into like grown-up life. I like to call it.
Yeah.
which has been real difficult lately. And then in my coaching, I do more of the athletes, which is where kind of the toxic comparison, where that really starts because of the practice and the level. And you can start earlier and stay later and still not be performing the way somebody else is. And then I work with a lot of physicians and medical providers, which has significantly increased in the last couple of years, which, having worked in the hospitals for 15 years, like I love working with that population because they're so critical. Like we all need them at some point or another. And you want to make sure that they are not giving into the stigmas that they should be care providers and not take care of themselves, that they shouldn't need that care, just like therapists do. We're awful with it.
Yes. And you know what? There is a lot. And you saying that, I haven't met therapists that have it all together, which is fine. But also, there is another part is that if you go to a therapist, they need to be a bit more grounded
Yeah.
to hold the space for the other person. But there are a lot of therapists that people have come to me, and not the therapist, but the client has said, "Oh, my therapist couldn't hold my space for me because they haven't had their stuff all together," which is interesting.
Yep.
Very interesting to hear that, because we still have our own life behind the scenes. So we do need to keep it together, but we also need to have that self-care, which you've just said, and actually balance it out for our own mental health.
And not feel bad about it. Like,
And not feel bad. Yeah, exactly.
I remember when my kids were little and going to the grocery store in the community that I was working in, and my kids were just like, it was always like on the edge. I have two, they're 18 months apart. And it was like, you just needed one thing to go wrong. Right. And so I turned the corner, and luckily they were having a good day, but I had always thought, like, they're gonna have a bad day and they're gonna be melted down and I'm gonna be like super stressed out, just trying to get through checkout and run into a client. And it happened. I mean, I ran into a family that I was working with, and luckily they're lovely and so gracious and kind because her kids were older. And mine were just like, fine, but on the edge. And she just knew it. She's like, I'm just going to say hi and keep going because I know what that looks like. And I was like, thank you.
Which is great, because that actually brings the point back to what you said at the beginning, was that we're all human and we all have different areas in our life that sometimes it happens. And and the other thing that you said about the medical profession too, I've had a client as a nurse, and for years she gave all the time, and then she forgot about herself.
Yep.
And it was that giving constantly and didn't think anything of it until later on in life. Now she's retired, and now she has high anxiety because it's like that buildup, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing is it becomes so normalized, right? You show up to work every day. I mean, working in the emergency room where I worked on all different floors, but I spent the most time in the emergency room, and you're going from crisis to crisis, and there's always somebody who needs something. And, the things that they see that I've seen in the emergency room, they deal with babies dying, stillborn deaths, like all of the things, right? And to show up with compassion every day is astounding, but they're not fully guarded from burnout. And so I think that we saw a lot of it more visible in the last 3 years because of the strain, but that was always there. And it's really hard because up until recently, physicians could seek out mental health, but there's a huge stigma there. And they had to report it when they did their board certification, if they had been diagnosed or treated for anything. And so it was very preventative. And because there's just a lot of stigma about mental health as it shows up in the hospital, which is not always like the best representation but you don't want people to question your knowledge, your job, your ability, right? Which is the same thing with therapists or executives. Like, no matter what the level is, teachers in the last few years, like, they don't talk about their anxiety. They just show up to work every day. And I think that's where part of my work and getting out there and talking about things is because I've been anxious. I don't have anxiety, but my kids make me anxious, right? Something happening to them makes me anxious.
Yeah, of
You know,
course.
it's a normal feeling. And I talk about this, like, when people have thyroid issues or blood pressure issues, it's nothing they did to cause it.
Mhm.
They just have these things, sometimes cancer, whatever, allergies, asthma, but we would never ask a professional to not seek out treatment for their allergies or asthma or thyroid condition, even though it's not life-threatening at the moment. We would never shame them into not seeking treatment.
Yes.
Because of the stigma of it. And yet we do that for mental health. And I always give the example of, like, when a kid's having a panic attack, don't just, or a human, not even a kid, don't just tell them to breathe. That's like having somebody having an asthma attack and being like, oh, just take a deep breath, you'll be fine. Like, they can't in that moment. And so having that empathy and compassion to say, like, hey, let me help you out. Here's some skills that you can do so you have them in your toolbox. And you know what? If you don't need them one day, that's amazing. But you might be working next to somebody or on the bus with somebody or, at a baseball game with somebody who you see is having a panic attack and be able to pass that on. And what an amazing gift that is to just have that knowledge.
Exactly. Oh, amazing. Yeah, it is. And that's fantastic. It's amazing that you've been in business and doing this for 20 years with social work and counseling, now coaching, and you have all these areas of your life that you've really grabbed on. And that RISE acronym has been just fantastic. I'm going to put that in the show notes for people that are really interested in either working with you or getting to know you more. I know you're probably quite busy at the moment, but it's nice to, for people to reach out. If they want some tools and tricks, then you can provide them with that. Mental health in particular, as you said, there's a lot of stigma around it. And what we've been exploring today, I'd really like to know, just before we end this episode, is what would you like the viewers and the listeners to get out of this podcast today, and why?
That's such a big question. I think that the biggest thing is that there's always a human element. And as long as you can see the human in other people, no matter what they're going through, we all have struggles at different levels, and empathizing and seeing them as a human with feelings, which is a positive thing. That is, as long as you can do that, you'll make the world a better place, because that's really where we need to start, is remembering that no matter what else we might disagree with or compare ourselves to, we're all humans and we all have these amazing big feelings. And so if you can step back from all the other stuff and just see other people as humans with big feelings and lives and amazing stories, it makes it a lot easier to connect and a lot harder to have all those negative feelings and comparisons and resentment. So, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I'm going to leave it at that, Tiffany. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we could talk about this subject all day long, but we try to keep it to the half an hour for everyone. If anyone wants to connect with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at T Turner Baldwin, on Facebook at Turner Coaching and Consulting, and my website, which I'm uploading some freebies on things like up and down comparison worksheets and stuff like that in the next week or so. So there'll be lots of resources on there for you at tturnersolutions.com.
Okay, great, fantastic. I'll put all those in the show notes so people can find you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
jumping
much.
on.
It's been great. I love connecting with you.
Yeah, we need to keep in touch for sure. This is The
Absolutely.
Real Deal with Sean Matthews, where we have real conversations with real people, entrepreneurs and business owners alike. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.